here are the biggest gaming leaks and news you've probably missed this week. Alright, this next story is actually really interesting because it might be giving us our first real glimpse into Sony's PS6 strategy. And honestly, I think a lot of people are going to misunderstand what's happening here. So according to new leaks from Kepler L2, Sony may already be looking at ways to reduce PlayStation 6 manufacturing costs before the console even launches. And no, this doesn't mean the PS6 is going to be weak. It means Sony is trying to avoid another pricing disaster. Because let's be real for a second, hardware right now is expensive, really expensive. RAM prices are climbing, chip production costs are getting uglier, yields are harder to maintain on advanced nodes, and companies are reaching a point where they can't just brute force performance increases forever without the final price becoming insane. That's where this leak comes in. Earlier rumors suggested the PS6 might use 30 gigabytes of memory, but now the newer reports claim Sony could instead go with 24 gigabytes of memory paired with a 128-bit memory bus. Alright, we need to talk about these PS6 rumors because I'm already seeing people online completely misunderstand what's actually being said here. First off, this is still rumor territory. Just because Sony is reportedly looking at different hardware configurations behind the scenes does not automatically mean the PlayStation 6 is suddenly getting downgraded or becoming weak. That's not how hardware development works. These companies test multiple configurations years before launch. That's normal, especially this early. And honestly, if anything, Sony already showed us during the PS5 generation that they're willing to absorb pain to maintain their hardware targets. Remember the chip shortages? Component pricing was exploding, supply chains were a mess, everything was getting more expensive, and yet Sony still pushed forward with the PS5 and eventually the PS5 Pro, instead of suddenly gutting the hardware halfway through development. That matters. So when people see rumors about 24 gigabytes RAM or a 128-bit memory bus and instantly start acting like the PS6 is doomed, I think that's jumping way too far ahead. What this really sounds like is Sony exploring options. And honestly, they'd be crazy not to. Hardware right now is insanely expensive. RAM pricing is climbing, advanced nodes are expensive, yields are harder to maintain, and console makers are trying to figure out how to build next-generation systems without launching a machine that costs the same as a used car. I genuinely think the PS6 is probably going to cost around $900 or maybe even more, depending on the final configuration. And before people freak out hearing that, look around the hardware market right now. Mid-range PC GPUs are absurdly priced. DDR5 pricing has been all over the place. SSD prices climbed. Everything is getting more expensive. We're not living in the PS4 era anymore, where companies could casually launch a powerful console at $399 and eat the losses forever. Now, regarding the release date, I also disagree with these 2030 discussions people keep throwing around lately. The PS6 is almost certainly happening in 2027. Everything lines up for that timeline. The PS5 launched in 2020. The PS5 Pro now exists as the mid-generation upgrade. Sony clearly wants the Pro to bridge the gap into the next era with AI-assisted rendering, PSSR evolution, machine learning features, and better ray tracing workflows. A 2027 launch makes complete sense. I don't see Sony waiting until 2028 or 2030 unless something catastrophic happens to the global economy or hardware manufacturing industry. And honestly, by 2027, developers are going to be pushing Unreal Engine 5 and next-gen rendering techniques even harder than they already are now. Games like GTA 6 alone are probably going to completely reshape expectations for open-world visuals and simulation density. And that's another reason I don't buy the Sony is downgrading PS6 narrative. Sony knows what's coming. They know where game development is heading. They know AI reconstruction, ray tracing, machine learning, and simulation complexity are becoming massive parts of modern rendering pipelines. The PS6 doesn't need to brute force everything traditionally if smarter rendering techniques continue evolving the way they are right now. That's literally part of why the PS5 Pro exists. So personally, I think what we're really seeing here is Sony trying to find the smartest balance between performance, manufacturing efficiency, AI-assisted rendering, heat, power consumption, and final price. Not panic, not downgrades, not some weak next-gen machine, just reality. And honestly, I'd rather Sony intelligently balance the hardware than launch some monster console that costs $1,400 and instantly kills mainstream adoption. But now I'm curious where you stand on this. Would you accept a smaller raw hardware leap if AI rendering and reconstruction tech massively improved visual quality anyway? Or do you think the PS6 absolutely needs a huge traditional power jump, no matter how expensive the console becomes?